tell us it's perfect. There we are. We are recording. We have video, audio, all the things. Fantastic. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ann Fletcher from Orta Seed Pods, and I'm here today with Lia Babitch. That's how you pronounce your name, right?
Yep, that's correct.
From Turtle Tree Seed. And I am so excited to talk to you because, like I said in the emails we've been exchanging, I keep coming across you guys over and over again. It's like peeling back the onion of the seed of like where it came from, and I'll find the small grower, and then there'll be a little mention that says, thank you to Turtle Tree Seed for reviving this variety, or thank you to Turtle Tree Seed for turning us on to this and providing the original seed. And I'm so excited to finally talk to you. It feels like I'm coming to the heart of where so many of the seeds that I love originate. Well, not originate, of course, because they've originated all over the world, but they kind of come through you. Mm-hmm. So before we get into the nitty gritty of seeds, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Turtle Tree Seeds and kind of, yeah, how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. Well, let me first tell you a bit about Turtle Tree Seed, because that's a whole big thing.
Yeah.
So Turtle Tree Seed we're located in Hudson, well, in Copake, New York, which is outside of Hudson Valley. And we're in a very, very unique community. Well, actually, it's not that, well, it is fairly unique. There are other ones around, but this one is where we live. And it is a community that especially lives and works with people with developmental challenges. So we have 600 and change acres, mostly wooded, some swamp, and then agricultural land and houses. And we have about 25 houses where people, sort of long-term volunteers like myself, live with their families, and with a couple of young volunteers who come for usually a year or so, and then 4 or 5 people with developmental challenges who were all living as part of a household together. And then within the village, we have Turtle Tree Seed, we have a vegetable garden, we have a small dairy farm for just our own use, we have a herb and healing plant garden, we have a forestry and estate which does maple syrup and firewood and trash collection and lawn mowing. And we also have a bookbindery and a candle making shop and a weaving shop and a woodworking shop and a really nice bakery that does great bread and a coffee shop and a little co-op where we all work together. Mm-hmm. And so Turtle Tree is a part of this fabric of this community. And I am one of the co-managers of Turtle Tree, along with Ian Robb. And our colleagues, our long-term colleagues, many of them have developmental challenges. And then we have a few longer-term colleagues who are also, neurotypical, whatever. And then also young volunteers who come usually for a year. Sometimes they decide to stay longer. Sometimes they only come for half a year, who come to learn. And most of them have no idea that there's more than one kind of carrot. But, they soon learn, and it's really fun to work with them, and also to work alongside the folks with developmental challenges to teach these guys something about, seed work and gardening.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been there?
For 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when you came, did you come as like a 1-year volunteer and just stay forever? Or did you come knowing that you were, going to stay and have it be your job?
Yeah, I came knowing that I would stay. I had just finished my biodynamic gardening training in England, where I met my husband, and we were looking for a place to land where there was room for more than one gardener. He also trained as a gardener, although he's done many other things since then. But also I had grown up in a similar community in Pennsylvania. And when I was doing my biodynamic training, I was working in a similar community in England. And so although when I came back here, I wasn't necessarily looking to move to a Camphill Village, which is what these communities are called. But the people who were at that time running Turtle Tree Seed, Beth and Nathan, who were the founders, they wanted to move on. They were ready to be someplace else and do something different. Although they ended up going and doing seed work. It's hard to get away from it. Yeah, and so they were looking for the next person to be there, and that was right when I was ready to be there. So,
oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
And so you're the co-manager. So for those of us who aren't familiar with how seed work works on a daily basis, what does a manager of a seed company do all day? Like, do you pack the seeds? Do you do marketing? Are you harvesting? Are you cleaning? Are you planting?
Yep, all of those things. Yep. So we loosely have it split up that Ian does more of the indoor work. He had been a vegetable grower for many years, and then he was a dairy farmer for many years before getting into seed work after an injury left him not able to do more like heavy outside work. And I do more of the outside work, although I would say I plan more of the outside work. Mm-hmm. And then my crew, I would say, does most of the outside work, although I am with them as much as possible, but I also do like marketing, and I also put together the catalog, and I also help with inventory, and I help with seed cleaning, and I help with order fulfillment, sort of just all the things that come up.
Yeah. And so I'm very much a beginner seed saver cleaner myself. Mm-hmm. And the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything, because there's so much.
Yep.
How have you learned it? Like, did you learn it in school studying? Are you learning it as you go? Where, like, how? Because I look at you as an expert and have so much respect for how you know what you're doing, but it's not like, you go to school to be a doctor and you get certified and there's like okay, now you know enough. How have you been learning, and how do you know enough to do what you do?
That's a really good question. And sometimes I feel like I don't know enough. During my biodynamic training, we did some seed saving, and on the farm that I was working on, we had, I think, 4 or 5 varieties that we were growing for a seed company. So I had that experience of just those few varieties, and those were varieties that we saved every year on that farm. But when I came here, I kind of just got a crash course in everything you need to know. Beth and Nathan stayed on for, I think, 6 and 10 months respectively. And just during that time, I spent all my time with them trying to suck in as much information as possible. Mm-hmm. I took a seed course with late great John Navazio, who taught so many people. And then every year I just, learn new things, I keep on learning new things every year. Yeah. I mean, there's certain basics, like isolation distance and, the best way to, get seeds out of a tomato or whatever. There's there's just practical stuff that you have to know and that you learn. And once you know. And then through practice, there are other things that you start to develop. And that's just doing it over and over and over again, particularly in the work of selection. When you're going down a row and you're like, okay, which are the plants that I want to select for what we would call stock seed, mm-hmm. which is like the seed that we will use to make more seeds instead of to make more vegetables. Mm-hmm. So like the top of the top. And at first that's a very, you have to think about, the color and the texture and the height and the, growing habit and all, just looking at all the things. I still have to taste everything because you can't see that from the outside. But you begin to develop something that just allows you quickly to discern that. Yeah, but that's just built up, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I'm starting to learn it. Starting to learn it.
Starting after 15 years.
Yeah, always starting.
Yeah. I feel like that's something that comes up every time I have these conversations, and just with gardeners too. It's we're all learning. Even someone who's been doing it forever, I'm not a very good gardener. I'm just beginning. 30 years in, I'm just beginning.
Well, I think there's this built-in optimism that's like, next year I'm gonna you come to September and you have all these ideas of like, okay, this went wrong, so we're going to change it to this. And that was really great, so we're going to keep on doing that. And how about this? And there's this new idea I just heard about, let's try that. And so there's this huge optimism for next year that like everything is going to go absolutely perfectly. And you get to September next year and there'll be a whole set of new things. You're like, oh, we can do this next year. It'll be great. So, that's, yeah.
I love that you're looking at that as opportunities for optimism rather than the, oh, failed again.
Yeah. Well, there's some of that too. There's some of that too.
Yeah. So I have a question for you about selection. So something I've been learning lately is that there seem to be two kind of opposed, or maybe they can be complementary a little bit, ideas about how to select. And one of them is that you're trying to preserve a variety in its most perfect, pure form. So you're roguing out the off types, you're choosing the one that's kind of the platonic ideal of that variety. And then other seeds growers are intentionally introducing different genetics in order to breed in adaptability and variability, so that on purpose, the varieties are a little bit different so that they can be more resilient to different conditions. Where do you fall on that? In that?
I feel like as a seed company, it's there. I mean, there are some seed companies that do sell like, this is a wild and woolly mix of something that is, a very diverse set of genetics that is going to express in many ways. And you buy it knowing this is going to be a bunch of different stuff. And that's fine. But we tend more towards, we want to keep, we always want to keep a broad genetic base, because that's really important. And we always want to be, I wouldn't say stressing our plants, but we always want to be like, we don't water tons. The last 3 years, we haven't set up any irrigation. We just water things in the beginning of the season, and then, that's it basically. Unless there's a very hot and dry spell really early on, and then we might water one more time. So we're always, kind of working with our plants to have them express the diversity within the variety, so that we can make sure that we get as much of that saved to, like, as possible. But we also are working with the idea that we don't want these, like, we do want certain varieties to be kept as their variety. Like there's the value and importance to that as well. That we can hand things on maybe better than we got them. And maybe we can hand on some things that are completely different. Sometimes we'll do selection out of a variety and like, a new thing out of that. But still recognizable.
So you said that it's important, you talked about the broad genetic base, and you said that that's important. Can you talk a little bit about why the broad genetic base is important to be preserving?
Well, basically because nature is smarter than we are. And so this is totally my opinion. This is 100% my opinion, and other people have very, very, very different opinions. I think nature is smarter than us. And so there are people who are making hybrids, etc., who, are like, okay, we're going to, these 6 traits are going to be super important, so we're going to make that, or these 3 traits, or whatever it is. And narrowing genetic streams so you can get just exactly what you want. I tend to feel like if we have like many plants that are all phenotypically similar, so they're all showing the same outside, but they're genetically diverse, there might be resilience in there that we just don't know about yet, because we haven't had a chance to use it. Those conditions that are going to let that particular thing shine haven't come up yet, but they might. And we don't know, like, we don't know yet. And so just leaving room for that, by keeping diversity in is really important, because, like, I mean, I can guess at some possible futures, but I certainly don't know everything that's going to be important for a given variety in the future.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to put it. Nature's smarter than us. There's something in there. Let's just leave it in.
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so there's a particular variety I want to talk about, which is it was the first one I think that led me to you guys. It was a long time ago. It's Macola lettuce.
Mhm.
I love Macola lettuce. It's super hard to find. And I understand you all were the ones who rescued it from like being totally lost and have now distributed it to other small seed companies who are kind of reviving it. Were you part of that? Or do you know how that happened?
You know, it was before I got to Turtle Tree.
Mhm.
But I know that it was just always a lettuce that that Beth and Nathan just really loved.
Mhm.
It was one of Beth's favorite lettuces. And I actually don't know where it came from. I suspect it came from Switzerland, because they did their seed training in Switzerland. And so many of the varieties that they started out with that they really loved were from Switzerland. But I'm not sure about that at all.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I actually don't know the history of it, but I do know that it was Beth's favorite lettuce. So, or one of her favorite lettuces. So, yeah.
And it's definitely one of mine too.
Yeah.
So, and that's one that we did with the Seed Club. At this point, it was a couple, 2-3 years ago, maybe. And I've been saving seed from it ever since. It's just like
Awesome.
I don't know when we're going to find it again. You know,
Yeah.
There are companies who have it and it kind of comes and goes, but you know, I want to make sure. Are there varieties that you yourself have been involved with, either rediscovering, preserving, and sharing? And could you tell us about a couple of them?
I don't think I'm not really like an explorer in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But we have done some breeding of our own.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ones that we've bred was, we had a purple plum radish, which we loved. And every once in a while, it would just kick out a couple of pink sports. And they were just really pretty. And so every year I was like, oh, I should save these and do a pink version.
Mm-hmm.
And one year we had a big grow out that we were doing, I think, for another seed company, I think for Fedco. And they wanted like a 10% selection. So they wanted just like the top 10% of the roots, which is great because that makes it a really really good stock seed. And then we had all of these, not all these, but quite a few pink roots left over. And so we bred those and they continued to be pink for several years. And there were an occasional white one, but we took those out. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a fun little project. We've also done some untangling of hybrids,
Mm-hmm.
which, yeah, I mean, when you have for instance, one of the ones that we did was an onion. Gosh, which onion? I think it was Red Wing, which was just a good round red storage onion, but with very decent storage and really nice onion. But with hybrids, like they come and then they were replaced with something else, and then they're replaced with something else. And if you don't have them, you don't have them. Yeah. So, and that was a much longer project. That untangling that, it was about, because onions are biennial, so even just to do one cycle is 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
or 18 months. Yeah. And so that and because it was a hybrid, of course, the first year you get all kinds of stuff. You just get like some weird junk and things that look like scallions and yeah, things that aren't red at all. Some decent yellow onions in there. Yeah, so we eventually did untangle that But I think it was about a 10-year process to get it to be really decent and nice, to the 5th generation. And we're still, that one we're still working on. What we've called the untangled version is Red Dawn. No, Red Sunset, sorry, because we have Clear Dawn, which is one of our beloved storage onions. So Clear Dawn and Red Sunset. Figuring that could just be, either side of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we haven't done, I'm not I'm not a really like a world traveler who goes and finds things in nooks and crannies of the world. There are a lot of people who do that, and I am so appreciative of all their work. But I have a family and a community and responsibilities to deal with, and I just can't go airing off all the time. So I'm really happy that those people are able to do that, and I can't.
Yeah. And so those ones that you guys are known for, that I keep finding my way back to, is that because of Beth and Nathan's travels? They brought them in and have you've been sending them out into the world ever since then? Or maybe the varieties I'm finding are some of the ones that you've been breeding? Is that?
It could also be. We also, so we also have a very strong connection to some of the European seed companies, which have a very similar ethic to us. There's Bingenheim, which is also biodynamic, and they also work with people with developmental challenges. And Sativa, where Beth and Nathan trained. And they have, in Europe, oh gosh, they're so organized. I keep on wishing we could do it here, but we're just not, somehow we're not, it's not going to work. It's not going to work on this continent. But they have a whole organized seed breeders group. And every once in a while we'll send them some seed, and every once in a while they'll send us some seed. And so then we get some new varieties through that. And really wonderful things like Rolanka carrot, which I just think is like the best carrot ever. Yeah. So, and also we do try things. We pour through the seed catalogs and we see if there's anything interesting. But I would say we try more things than we end up adopting, for sure. Many more things than we end up adopting.
And how do you decide? Is it group consensus? Is it just sort of like, this seems good? Or, I mean, it seems like, because once you decide to do it, like if it's a 10-year process to untangle it, or a multi-year process to get to enough seed that you can sell it, like each one you decide to carry is a big commitment.
It is. And so it has to be something that we feel like we want to grow this every year. If we're going to have a vegetable garden, or a flower garden or whatever, this is something that we want to have in it every year. That we would feel like, oh gosh, we would feel missing out if we didn't grow it, basically. Yeah, I feel like it's a pretty high bar to put new stuff in. Probably a little less high for flowers. In a certain way, because we like so many flowers. But vegetables, certainly it's got to be something that we can't really live without.
And so how many varieties are you growing and tracking at any given time?
Yeah, so in our catalog we have about, it's like 380 some varieties. Each year we'll grow out about 70, maybe a few more some years and a few less some years, acknowledging that we may have crop failures of some of those. There's some varieties that we basically have to grow almost every year, especially beans and peas, certain varieties of beans and peas. But tomatoes, in one year we can grow enough that, this year I think we have enough Chadwick cherry tomatoes for like the next, 3 centuries, because they were just so prolific. And we kept on harvesting and we kept on processing seed, and now we have way more seed than we need. But so it depends. But I would say about between 70 and 80 varieties a year that we're growing for seed.
So that's a lot to keep track of. And are you the keeper tracker of things?
Yes, I am the keeper tracker of things.
And how do you do that? How do you manage the isolation distances, the harvest times, and when to plant everything? And how do you stay on top of that?
So our crop rotation is like a 3D puzzle of epic proportions. We have 3 different gardens for isolation. And however, one of them is kind of close to the vegetable garden. So whatever they're growing, if there's certain things that have a smaller isolation distance, then we can't grow, or a bigger isolation distance, then we can't grow them there. Yeah, it's good fun. It's, you know, and then you're having to also think about your lettuce is going to get 3 feet tall, and we have to put roofing on our lettuce here in New York because when it goes to seed, if it gets wet, then the seed will be of poor quality. And so, you know, is it going to be next to something else that's also going to get tall that you're going to hit your head when you're going under to try to harvest? Or, you know, so there's all these sort of like airflow things, trying to make sure that, you know, you're going to have good airflow and not have all the tall things next to each other. And yeah, so it's yeah, I mean, it's a fun intellectual puzzle sometime in sort of January, February time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, that puzzle has to go out on the field, and it does. And, you know, we have all the plans written down, and that's fine. In terms of planting, the nice thing about seed growing is kind of you plant it and then you just have to keep caring for it until it's time to harvest. You don't have to, like, we don't have to do successions of lettuce. We don't have to do successions of dill all the time, you know? So it's, when I look at my like market vegetable gardening friends, I feel really lucky because I just have to do a lot of like staking things to make sure they don't blow over and just keeping everything weeded. I don't have to be like perpetually harvesting and perpetually reseeding.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in that way, it's much, it has a different rhythm. But then on the other hand, they get to relax in the winter, and the winter is also super busy for us. So it, you know, it all evens out.
Because in the winter, what are you guys up to in the winter?
Well, that's when everyone wants to buy their seeds. So everyone's sitting back with their seed catalogs and like marking things down and nice cup of tea. And we're like just frantically filling orders and trying to make sure the packets are filled. And, you know, yeah, so it's just all go.
Mm-hmm. And so how many people total are involved in growing the 70-ish varieties a year, harvesting, cleaning, packing, shipping,
Mhm.
planting out the next year?
It's about 20 people, 20, maybe 23 or 24 at the moment. Some years we have more people, some years to about 30 people. And about just a little over half of those people have developmental challenges. And then probably about six of those people are people who like our young volunteers who just like are a great set of hands. And then there's 4 of us who have more experience, who are kind of carrying things. So Ian and I and 2 other helpers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I want to come back to these varieties and how you choose, because you know you've seen so many varieties over the years. You trade with the European companies. You kind of look through catalogs for things that are interesting. I'm not even sure how to phrase the question, but I guess as someone who's seen so many and grown so many out and tested so many, like what can we learn from you besides like Mikola is really good and there's the snow pea that we're gonna get, you know, at that level I get, but kind of zooming out, what can we learn from what you've been seeing?
That's a really good question, and I don't know if I have an answer. Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer to that, but it is a very good question.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to think about how to ask that more
Okay.
succinctly and as we go along.
Okay.
while I'm thinking about that, anybody in the audience, do you have any questions you want to ask right now while I'm trying to formulate a better question?
Hi, my name is Geeka, and it occurred to me to ask you if you could go back 15 years, what would you tell yourself that would have been really useful to hear?
Um, I guess that you're not going to get it perfect the first or the second or the 15th time. Yeah. That it's not, yeah. That it's, that things are always going to turn out slightly different than you expect. And some of them will be much more wonderful and some of them will be much more terrible. And that'll just keep on going. No matter how much you learn, no matter how much experience you have, things will always surprise you.
Thanks, Geeka. Anybody else want to hop in with a question? Because I can definitely keep going. All right, so I kind of want to follow up. This is a little bit of a follow-up from Geeka's question and maybe narrowing mine down a little bit, which is, what do you see, what advice would you give to home gardeners who are growing from seed? They're learning about it, but obviously don't know as much as you, but they're interested in starting to grow a lot more from seed. What should they know about choosing seeds, about kind of thinking about their varieties and seed saving for the future if they're kind of just getting started?
Yeah. I would say think about what you use. Think about what you are interested in using and how you, yeah, I mean, if you're somebody who, you know, whose diet is like heavily based on, tomato sauce, then maybe you want to really, grow a bunch of paste tomatoes. I mean, it's just, it's sort of just making sure that what you're growing is in line with what you want and what you're going to use. You don't have to have, the same garden as everybody else. You don't have to have, yeah, you don't have to, just because everybody's growing zucchini doesn't mean you have to grow zucchini if you don't really like it. Just figure out what you like and what you're interested in and do that. And if you fail, try again different next year, and that's fine. Or try again the same next year because the weather might be different and it might work. So, yeah.
And as people are looking for seeds, I've had this question a couple of times. How important is it to buy seed from companies that are kind of local and are adapting seed to your climate? Or does it not really matter that much because you can kind of adapt it to your climate over time if you're saving seed from it, if it just seems like something really neat you want to try?
Yeah. There's a lot of I feel like it's very fashionable to be regionally adapted right now. And that's awesome. And I love that. And also seeds are this amazing and magical thing that have the capacity to work in many, many places all over the world. Yeah. So I wouldn't say get hung up on it. But, if something's working for someone who has the same conditions as you, it very well likely could work for you. And if they have very, very different conditions and you really want to try it anyway and just see, I think the more important thing is to have seed from companies that are not using chemicals, because seeds are in the ground for so long, there's a really long time for them to need weeding. And so if you're buying seeds, conventional seeds, the amount of like herbicide and other things that are put onto seed crops, also because they're not being eaten. So there's other things that pesticides that you can also put onto them, is just much, much more than for food crops. And so if you are eating organic food because you feel like you don't want to be poisoning the earth, I would say seeds are like an order of magnitude more important, because the things that are put on them conventionally are so much, there's more, like there's longer duration, and there's also stronger things that can be put on them because they're not for food.
Like the rules are different.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, it's the same with flowers. So you can think, I mean, in a certain way.
That's interesting. So you should be looking for seeds that are labeled organically grown.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you know the seed company and you know they're not, or the seed source, you know, if it's your friend's garden and you know they're not, it doesn't have to be labeled organic, but yeah.
That's an interesting question. So it's not so much about the seeds themselves being contaminated because they're so tiny. It's the fact that they're being grown in this.
Yeah.
The production. I've also heard too that by growing seeds conventionally, you're saving seeds from pampered plants.
Yes.
Right? So this kind of vague thing or not vague, but sort of subtle thing that you talk about plant selection is different if it's conventional, because you can't see what their natural defenses are really.
Yep. Yep. And you know, because we're growing seeds in the system that we are, our plants have to go out and scavenge for the nutrients in the soil, and they have to, you know, be vigorous enough to outgrow weeds, and they have to, you know, they just have to do all these things that you wouldn't have to do if you have a lot of like water soluble nutrient nitrogen that's just like kind of bulking you up, and you have like no weeds around you. And yeah, so they have to get their elbow in a little bit, which we want plants that are a bit tough.
And can you see that in the way they're growing as you're selecting them? Do you kind of keep your eye on which ones are doing better?
Yep, for sure.
And what are you looking for? I mean, you said it's something that you kind of are learning, have learned, and it's not right or wrong the way, you know, how to just store tomato seeds, but what do you look for?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds a little bit sort of amorphous, but it's just like an exceptionally healthy plant. That's not, it's not outgrowing itself, and it's not undergrowing itself. It's just, you know, it's not too hot and it's not too cold. It's just right. Which is, I mean, that's a really vague answer, and it's probably not very helpful if you're like, well, but which one of these should I save? Yeah. Yeah, I don't have a more, I can't really give a more specific answer to that. I think for an individual crop, it's probably easier, but when you're kind of like making a generalization about any kind of crop, yeah,
just looking for the healthy ones. I mean, that makes a lot of sense for sure.
Yeah.
So, did you grow any new varieties this year for seed?
No, we trialed a few new varieties, but we didn't grow any of them for seed. Yeah, there's one variety of corn that we trialed, sweet corn that we trialed, which I would like eventually to grow for seed. I think we trialed 5 or 6, but one was standout, so that will be on our list. Eventually we have to bulk it up and everything, but yeah.
Where did that corn come from?
That was one of the European varieties.
Oh, interesting. Corn
Yeah.
from Europe. Like from
I know, full circle.
Yeah. And then, so you say it'll take a few years. What happens in those years will you trial it again just to make sure that it's still good, or you're like, it's go, so now we're going to start working on seed production?
Because it's a sweet corn, so we'll be able to grow a a medium-sized patch of it. And we will eat some of the sweet corn, but we'll probably leave a substantial amount. And if those ones are still like as we want them to be, which I have a lot of confidence in their breeding. So I think that I'm sure it will be as good as it was this year, although this year was a pretty reasonable growing year. Yeah, then we'll leave the rest to mature and save seed from that. And then depends if we have enough, we might sell some, or we might then grow it another year just to bulk up the amounts.
So you kind of like a little bit and then a little bigger and then a little bigger to kind of get to where you can sell. And I want to go back to something you talked about for Fedco. You were doing a top 10 selection of radish for theirs. And was that because that they were then going to sell that seed, or that was like the stock seed for them to then grow out?
Yeah, that was stock seed. And I think a lot of companies, when they send stock seed to growers, they're not expecting that grower to do selections. So it has to be a really, really narrow selection to begin with, so that when they grow it out, there's less chance of any off types being in it. Just because they're not necessarily, if they're growing a big field of it, they're not necessarily going to go through and take out any off types. They might, but they might not.
So, and maybe that's where things keep coming back to you guys as stock seed growers. How much of your business is stock seed growing for other growers?
Actually, very little.
Yeah.
But we do, because we're growing, I mean, we're only growing on about 3 acres. And so it's a small enough space that you can really pay attention, and you can really we can do selection on everything that we're growing. And so our seed, we're not like sending, I don't know, a pound of something to someplace in the South where they can just grow a big field of it, and then they're going to send it back to us. We're actually growing the actual seed that we sell. And we have a few farmers that we work with as well, but they're also like growing the actual seed that we're going to sell and doing the selection. So I would say most of our seed is like stock quality seed. Just anyway. Sort of like we're small enough that we can pay attention to like, the sort of ins and outs a little more easily.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating, which means I'm very excited to get the seeds from you guys and see what happens. It's very exciting. So I have just a couple more questions about seed industry, and then maybe come back to that vague one I was asking before. So in the seed industry, like a seed grower, they would start with a stock seed and then they'll grow out a big crop for it. And I've learned that it's usually they're doing it like on contract for somebody else. Like a big seed company will hire a small farmer to grow, 10 pounds of lettuce, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So for that person, are they going to buy the stock seed every time to make sure that it's a really good selection, or are they then kind of selecting themselves and they'll kind of keep producing it? Or does it tend to be like a one-off that, like a bigger company would order 50 pounds of something just once, and then they'll order 50 pounds of something else from somebody else next year?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't have so much experience with that world. But I think that typically like the company will specify the stock seeds, either the stock seed source, or they'll send you the stock seed themselves. It's not usually, I think, the farmers then sort of having a selection out of the ones that they have to make more stock seed. Usually you're either like, they will contract somebody to grow the stock seed, and then who's going to do a tight selection, and then send it on to somebody who's just going to grow a big batch of it.
Gotcha.
But here that will kind of be each time. That it's like, okay, this is the stock seed, here it is, grow that.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. I had never really I kind of been putting together the pieces of this system over the years, which is so interesting, of course, because as a gardener for many years, and I mean, I run a company making pots for selling seeds in a seed club, and the whole thing, it's so opaque how the world works.
Yeah.
For seeds and where your food comes from, Yeah. On the inside of it, do you feel like it should be more transparent where seeds are come from?
Yes, yes, I do. Um, I mean, that's one of the things that like Turtle Tree has always done. In our catalog, we have who the seed is grown by. And then in the front of the catalog, in our paper catalog, we don't have it online, just because some people are concerned about privacy. But yeah, and then we have sort of like what their farm situation is, where their farm is, like whether they have animals on their farm, whether they have, whether they're part of a school, whether they're part of a community like a CSA, or yeah, sort of what the social structure is around their family farm. Yeah, so we have a little like, there's a little grower code, it says grown by so and so, and then you can look in the front and you can be like, oh, okay, this was grown on, I don't know, a school farm in Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. Just because I want to know, like, I want to know where my seed comes from. Not necessarily because I think it will or will not grow. But I want to know that it's been treated well and yeah, loved and cared for.
Yeah, me too. And I feel like for so many years, I would see these seed packets at the nursery and they'd be covered in these beautiful pictures and it would just draw me in. And, I didn't understand that the name on the packet is not who grew the seed, right?
Yeah.
It never occurred to me.
Yeah.
That there's like this whole other system.
Yeah, I know. Most seed companies don't grow any seed. Yeah, it's
just fascinating. Okay, so we're getting towards the end. Let's see, any other questions from our audience here before I finish up? Okay. So I'm going to try and ask this again more succinctly. What can home gardeners do to be more involved with their seeds? What do you think we might not know? Like that we don't know necessarily where seeds come from, but what else? What can we do to be more involved in your world?
I mean, I think you like start saving seeds. Just like, even if it's just like, some of your cosmos out in the front yard are going to seed, and you just, pull off some seeds and then put them in a little, paper envelope for next year. Just it can be very simple. But if you just start doing it, first of all, it's very satisfying, but it's also you start learning, and maybe like 5 or 6 heads are sorry, my phone is dying. Maybe there's 5 or 6 lettuce heads in the side of your garden that you can just let go to seed, and you'll have enough lettuce seeds for your garden and your friends' gardens and your friends' gardens.
That way.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say just kind of, and it's also interesting to see what plants do when they're going to seed, because there are a lot of plants that we don't really get to experience that side of them, especially like leafy greens and biennials. Like, just plant a couple of onions back into your garden and see what happens, or leeks or something. It's yeah, it's worthwhile. Just to look and see. Yeah.
Let's see, here's a question. It says, is it worth saving seed from a plant that never got huge, or a kale that I didn't treat very well, but it survived when the others didn't?
I would say the kale, definitely. Yeah. A bad year for growing is a good year for seeds, because you get a good selection of, you get something that so the plants will start to reveal themselves, like the one that survived. Or hopefully it's more than one, because if you're narrowing the genetics down to one plant, that can be a little dangerous into the future, especially for brassicas. But yeah, if when you have those extraordinary plants, it's definitely worth saving seed from them.
Mhm.
What I would do with that, especially if it's a kale, is next year I would get more of the same variety and save seed from the other ones and that one, seeds from that one as well. So I would sow some of yours and some of someone else's of the same variety, and then let them mix in the coming year, just so you're not narrowing the gene pool too much.
Mhm. So that you've got maybe half of the genes are from the really sturdy one and half are
Yeah.
blended.
Yeah.
Good idea. So those of us with smaller gardens at home, it's not like, don't ever just save from one, but then blend it back in.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good to know. Because I often feel like that as a home gardener, that like, well, it's only one, but then.
I would say if it's one generation, it's not going to do too much damage. But if it's like 2 or 3, that's when you're going to start to see real significant problems, and you can't really go back from that as well.
Mhm.
And so if you want to keep those good things in, yeah, bring in friends.
Mhm. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so we're right at our hour. Anything else you want to leave us with? Words of wisdom for home growers?
I would just say, keep being really optimistic about next year.
That's fantastic. I can use that. I'm definitely more on the like side of it. And where can we find more? Where can we learn more about you?
So we have a website at turtletreeseed.org. And then also, if you want to learn more about the community that we're a part of, that's camphillvillage.org.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for those of you who joined with questions. And I'm so looking forward to getting your seeds. We'll be in touch about the varieties and all the details. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.